Do you remember the last time you tried to get out of bed and your body simply didn't respond as expected? That feeling of betrayal when your muscles seem to have turned to lead overnight. For Mercedes, a 68-year-old woman who had been known all her life for her energy and vitality, this reality became constant. "I'm tired," she would repeat. And everyone around her, even her own family, responded with looks of disbelief and phrases that pierced like thorns. "It's just laziness, Mom. You need to try harder." No one could see that inside her body a silent battle was being fought, a condition that was slowly devouring her independence, her dignity, and her joy of living. This is the story of Mercedes and her fight against an invisible enemy that many don't know about, but affects millions of older people worldwide. Sarcopenia, an enemy that not only steals physical strength, but can also steal the spirit, if not recognized in time. Join me in this tale where you'll discover how a late diagnosis almost cost Mercedes everything, and how the right knowledge can make the difference between surrendering to deterioration or regaining control of your life. Mercedes had always been the pillar of her family. Mother of 3 children, grandmother of 5 grandchildren, and widowed for more than a decade, she had faced life with admirable strength. In her small coastal town, everyone knew her for her bakery, El Sabor de Mercedes, Mercedes flavor, where for 40 years she had kneaded the best bread in the region. Her strong and precise hands converted flour and water into small works of art that fed not only stomachs, but also the souls of her neighbors. Her routine began at 4 in the morning, when the rest of the town still slept. Mercedes would light the ovens and begin the dance of kneading, baking, and creating that she had perfected over the years. By the time the sun appeared on the horizon, the aroma of freshly baked bread already filled the nearby streets, attracting the first customers of the day. But in the last 2 years, something had changed. At first, they were small signs that Mercedes tried to ignore. It was harder to carry the flour sacks, her arms tired after kneading just a few batches of bread. The stairs leading to her apartment above the bakery had become a daily challenge, leaving her breathless and with trembling legs. "It's age," she told herself every time she needed to stop in the middle of a task to catch her breath. It's normal to feel tired at 68. However, deep in her heart, Mercedes knew this was different from any fatigue she had experienced before. The first time she was really scared was one spring morning. She was kneading as always when suddenly, without warning, her hands simply stopped responding. The pain wasn't intense, but rather a total absence of strength. The dough fell onto the counter, and Mercedes stared at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. That day, she had to call her son Carlos to come help her. It was the first time in 4 decades that Mercedes couldn't finish preparing the bread by herself. Carlos, her eldest son, arrived quickly at the bakery. He was a practical man, a bank manager in the neighboring city, always dressed in impeccable suits, and with a schedule so tight he rarely had time for spontaneous visits. When he saw his mother sitting in a chair, with flour on her hands and an expression of defeat on her face that he had never seen before, he felt a pang of concern mixed with impatience. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I have a meeting in an hour," he said, while looking at his watch. Mercedes tried to explain what had happened, how her hands had simply stopped working, but even as she spoke, she could see disbelief forming in her son's eyes. "Maybe you need to rest more," he responded, helping her finish the pending work. "You've always been too stubborn to admit you need a break." That was the first of many incidents. Gradually, Mercedes began to experience falls. The first occurred in the bakery, in front of several customers. She was carrying a tray of freshly baked bread when her legs gave way without warning. The tray flew through the air, and Mercedes landed on the floor with a dull thud that resonated throughout the establishment. The silence that followed was almost as painful as the fall itself. Then came the looks of pity, concern, and worst of all, doubt. Could she be drinking? She heard someone murmur as they helped her up. The humiliation burned more than the pain in her knees. From that day on, Mercedes noticed a change in how she was treated. Customers who once chatted animatedly with her now spoke slower and louder, as if she had lost her hearing along with her balance. Her children began taking turns to watch over her, as if she were a child needing constant supervision. Carlos even suggested that maybe it was time to think about the bakery's future, a subtle way of suggesting she should retire. But for Mercedes, the bakery wasn't just a business. It was her identity, her purpose in life. The idea of leaving it was more terrifying than the falls or weakness. What hurt Mercedes most wasn't the changes in her body, but the changes in how others perceived her. Throughout her life, she had been the strong one, the pillar, the one everyone turned to for help and advice. Now, suddenly, she had become a problem, a burden, someone who needed care, and worst of all, someone not taken seriously. When she tried to explain that something wasn't right, that it wasn't simply fatigue or old age, her complaints were dismissed with condescending smiles. "We all age, Mom," her daughter Anna would tell her. "You can't expect to have the same energy as before." If you identified with this story, know that you are not alone in this journey. Many people like you discover daily that muscle weakness doesn't have to define your future. Here on the Renewed Life channel, we share not just real stories, but proven paths that have helped thousands of people recover their strength and independence. Subscribe to receive our free content that combines the latest scientific knowledge with the sensitivity of someone who understands what you're going through. Together, we can transform this story. Mercedes' daily struggle became increasingly difficult. Activities she once performed without thinking now required all her concentration and effort. Kneading bread had become a battle against her own hands, which refused to obey as before. Climbing the stairs to her apartment was an expedition she planned carefully, making sure not to carry anything heavy and to have support points at each section. Even getting dressed in the morning had become a challenge that sometimes took her more than an hour, when her fingers refused to cooperate with buttons and zippers. The worst were the nights. Lying in the same bed she had shared with her late husband, Mercedes lay awake, tormented not only by the pain in her muscles, but by fear. Fear of what was happening to her body, fear of losing her independence, fear of becoming a burden to her children. And perhaps most terrifying, fear of losing the bakery, the legacy she had built with so much love and effort for decades. In those dark nights, silent tears wet her pillow as she wondered what she had done to deserve this punishment. One particularly difficult afternoon, Mercedes was trying to decorate some cakes for one of her grandchildren's birthday. Her hands shook uncontrollably, making the delicate glazing work she once mastered with such ease impossible. After ruining the third cake, she finally gave up. Frustration and helplessness washed over her like a wave, and for the first time since her problems began, Mercedes allowed herself to really cry. Not silent tears in the darkness of her room, but deep, heartbreaking sobs that shook her entire body. This is how Elena found her, her youngest daughter, who had come to visit without notice. Unlike her siblings, Elena wasn't a business person. She was a biology professor at the provincial university, with natural curiosity and an analytical mind that had always distinguished her from the rest of the family. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, alarmed to find her always strong mother broken down in tears in front of ruined cakes. Between sobs, Mercedes finally let out all the frustration and fear she'd been containing. She told her about her hands that no longer obeyed, about the increasingly frequent falls, about the constant fatigue that no rest seemed to alleviate, and worst of all, about how no one seemed to believe her that something was really wrong. Elena listened attentively, without interrupting, observing her mother with eyes that saw beyond the tears and frustration. When Mercedes finished speaking, Elena didn't offer the typical words of comfort or superficial suggestions she had already heard from everyone else. Instead, she did something no one had done until then. She took her hands, looked directly into her eyes and said, "I believe you, Mom, and we're going to find out what's happening." Those simple words, "I believe you," acted like a balm for Mercedes' wounded soul. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in her struggle. Elena, true to her scientific training, began asking systematic questions about Mercedes' symptoms. When exactly had they started? How had they evolved? What activities had become more difficult? She took detailed notes in her notebook, the same one she used for her university research. "This isn't normal, Mom," she said finally. "It's not just old age or fatigue. There's a pattern here that worries me. We need to have you seen by a doctor, a specialist." Mercedes sighed deeply. She had already visited her family doctor several times during the last year, but always left with the same prescription: painkillers for muscle pain and vitamins for age-related fatigue. "I've already been to the doctor, Elena. He says it's normal at my age," she responded with resignation. Elena shook her head, determination shining in her eyes. "Then we'll go to another doctor, and another after that if necessary. We won't stop until we find answers." Thus began the search for answers for Mercedes. Elena used her contacts at the university to get an appointment with a renowned neurologist in the provincial capital. On the day of the appointment, Mercedes felt nervous, but also hopeful. What if finally someone could explain what was happening to her body? Dr. Ramirez's office was sober and professional, with framed diplomas covering an entire wall, silent testimony to his qualifications. The doctor, a man of about 50 with thin framed glasses and a serious but kind expression, listened attentively while Mercedes and Elena described the symptoms. To Mercedes' surprise, Dr. Ramirez didn't dismiss her concerns like everyone else. Instead, he performed a thorough physical examination, paying special attention to muscle strength in different parts of her body. He asked Mercedes to perform several simple actions: stand up from a chair without using her arms, balance on one foot, squeeze his fingers against hers. With each test, his expression became more thoughtful. "We're going to need some tests," he said finally. "Blood work, electromyography, and I'd like to measure your muscle mass. I have some theories, but we need concrete data." The following weeks were a whirlwind of medical appointments, tests, and analyses. Mercedes had to leave the bakery in her assistant's care several days, something she had never done before. Elena accompanied her to every appointment, taking notes, asking questions, acting as her mother's tireless advocate. Carlos and Ana, seeing their younger sister's determination, finally began taking the situation seriously. Finally, 3 weeks after the first consultation, the day came to learn the results. Mercedes and Elena sat in front of Dr. Ramirez's desk, who had in front of him a thick folder with all the reports. "Mrs. Mercedes," he began with a grave voice, "based on all the tests we've performed, I can give you a clear diagnosis." He paused, adjusting his glasses. "You are suffering from advanced stage sarcopenia, complicated by severe nutritional deficiency." Mercedes blinked, confused. "Sarco? What?" The term was completely unfamiliar to her. "Sarcopenia," the doctor repeated. "It's a condition characterized by progressive loss of muscle mass and strength. It mainly affects people over 60, but your case is particularly severe for your age." Dr. Ramirez leaned back in his chair, adopting a more didactic tone. "Sarcopenia is multifactorial. It's partly a natural process of aging, but can be significantly accelerated by several factors: inadequate nutrition, especially low protein intake, lack of appropriate physical activity, certain hormonal problems, and in some cases, underlying inflammatory conditions." He looked directly at Mercedes. "In your case, I see several of these factors combined. Your tests show low levels of vitamin D and proteins, suggesting your nutrition hasn't been optimal. Additionally, despite your physical work at the bakery, that type of activity isn't sufficient to maintain muscle mass as we age." Mercedes felt a contradictory mix of emotions. On one hand, There was immense relief in finally having a name for what was happening, in knowing she wasn't imagining things. On the other hand, the implications of what the doctor was saying were terrifying. Does this mean I'll keep losing strength? That I won't be able to continue with my bakery? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Ramirez leaned forward, looking directly into her eyes. Mrs. Mercedes, sarcopenia is serious, but it's not a death sentence. With proper treatment, many patients manage not only to stop its progression, but even reverse part of the damage. I won't lie to you, it will require significant changes in your lifestyle, commitment to a specific exercise program, and possibly some supplements. But if you're willing to make that effort, there are good reasons to be optimistic. For the first time in a long time, Mercedes felt something she thought was lost: hope. Elena, always practical, was already taking detailed notes. What kind of exercises? What nutritional changes does she need to make? The doctor smiled, appreciating the family support Mercedes had. I'm going to refer her to a physiotherapist specialized in geriatrics and a nutritionist. They'll work together to design a personalized program. Generally, progressive resistance training is the foundation of sarcopenia treatment. Basically, exercises that challenge your muscles to work against some type of resistance, which is gradually increased as you get stronger. As the doctor continued explaining the treatment plan, Mercedes thought about all the times she had been dismissed, all the times she had been told she was exaggerating or simply aging. Now there was a name for her condition, an official diagnosis that validated everything she had been feeling. It wasn't laziness, it wasn't exaggeration, it wasn't simply old age. It was sarcopenia, a real medical condition that had been silently consuming her strength, independence, and dignity. Leaving the office, Mercedes felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders, not because the diagnosis was good, but because she finally had answers, and more importantly, a path forward. Eleanor, always her support, hugged her tightly. We'll face it together, Mom, step by step. Mercedes nodded, tears of relief and determination shining in her eyes. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. I need to ask, and I want you to be honest with yourself. When was the last time you were able to speak openly about how muscle strength loss has affected your daily life? Maybe you, like Mercedes, have kept this to yourself, thinking no one would really understand. I understand that silence, but I want you to know this is a space where your voice matters. If you feel comfortable, share in the comments by simply writing, "I also feel this when," and complete with your experience. Your comment might be exactly what someone needed to read today, to not feel alone in this journey. Sometimes, the first step to recovering our strength is simply acknowledging where we are now. The path to Mercedes' recovery was neither easy nor quick. It began with a visit to Lucia, the specialized physiotherapist Dr. Ramirez had referred her to. The rehabilitation center was in a modern building on the outskirts of the city, with large windows that let in natural light. In her first session, Lucia, an energetic woman of about 40, performed a complete evaluation of Mercedes's strength and mobility. Sarcopenia has mainly affected your proximal muscles, she explained. Those are the large muscles near the trunk, like those in the thighs, hips, and shoulders. That's why it's so hard for you to get up from a chair or climb stairs. Lucia designed a specific exercise program for Mercedes, starting with very basic movements she could perform, even with her diminished strength. Many people think they need to lift heavy weights to strengthen muscles, but we'll start with something much more accessible, she explained, showing her how to use light resistance elastic bands to work different muscle groups. The most important thing is consistency and gradual progression, 3 times a week, without fail. Parallel to physical training, Mercedes began working with Marta, a nutritionist specialized in older adults. The analysis of her usual diet revealed what Dr. Ramirez already suspected. Despite working surrounded by food, Mercedes' own nutrition was deficient in several crucial aspects. I see a lot of carbohydrate intake, which is understandable considering your profession, Marta commented while reviewing the food diary Mercedes had completed. But there's a notable lack of high-quality proteins and healthy fats, which are essential for maintaining muscle mass, especially as we age. The nutritionist designed a meal plan that incorporated more proteins in each meal: Greek yogurt with nuts for breakfast, salads with chicken or tuna for lunch, and dinners that always included a good portion of fish, eggs, or legumes. She also recommended specific supplements to address the deficiencies identified in the blood tests. The first days were discouraging. Mercedes felt exhausted after even the simplest exercises, and the changes in her diet seemed strange after decades of ingrained habits. There were moments when she wanted to give up, when the old voices of doubt returned to whisper in her mind, "Maybe it's too late. Maybe I'm really too old to change." In those moments, it was Elena who kept her focused, reminding her why she was fighting so hard. One night, after a particularly difficult exercise session, Mercedes collapsed in her favorite armchair, with tears of frustration running down her cheeks. "I can't do it, Elena. It's too difficult. My body doesn't want to cooperate." Elena knelt in front of her, taking her hands in hers. "Mom, remember what you always told me when I was a child and wanted to give up on something difficult? What's worthwhile is never easy." "Oh, the bakery wasn't easy at the beginning either, was it? But you persisted and built something beautiful. This is no different." Those words resonated deeply with Mercedes. It was true. The bakery hadn't been easy. She remembered the first years, the exhausting early mornings, the initial failures when the bread didn't turn out as expected, the financial difficulties that almost led her to bankruptcy. But she had persisted, day after day, adjusting, learning, improving. And eventually, El Sabor de Mercedes had become the heart of the town. If she had been able to overcome all those obstacles then, maybe she could also overcome this challenge now. With renewed determination, Mercedes committed completely to her recovery plan. Every morning, before opening the bakery, she dedicated 30 minutes to the exercises Lucia had taught her. At first they were simple movements with very light resistance bands, but as the weeks passed, she was able to progress to more resistant bands and more complex exercises. The change wasn't overnight. In fact, almost 3 months passed before Mercedes noticed a real difference in her strength and energy. It was an ordinary Tuesday when something extraordinary happened. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and realized, halfway up, that she hadn't stopped to rest even once. Her legs, which for so long had seemed heavy and unsteady, were supporting her with a firmness she had almost forgotten. Small victories like this began to accumulate. One day she could knead 3 batches of bread without rest. Another day, she noticed she could open a jar that would have been impossible for her before, and perhaps most significantly, the falls had ceased completely. 6 months after the diagnosis, Mercedes returned to Dr. Ramirez's office for a follow-up evaluation. The new tests showed what she already felt. Her muscle mass had increased significantly, her strength had improved in all evaluated muscle groups, and her nutritional levels were now within normal ranges. "Mrs. Mercedes," said the doctor with a genuine smile, "this is exactly the type of progress we were hoping to see. You've done exceptional work following the treatment plan." Elena, who has always accompanied her mother, couldn't contain her pride. "See, Mom? I told you we could do it." Mercedes squeezed her daughter's hand, silently thanking her for believing in her when she didn't even believe in herself. "Doctor," she asked, "does this mean I'm cured?" Dr. Ramirez removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully before responding. "Sarcopenia isn't something that's completely cured, Mrs. Mercedes. It's an aging-related process that to some extent affects everyone. But what you've achieved is gaining control over that process, significantly slowing it down, and even reversing part of the damage. If you continue with your current exercise and nutrition regimen, there's every reason to believe you'll maintain this improvement and may even continue progressing." For Mercedes, That response was more than enough. She didn't need a miracle. She only needed what she had achieved, her independence, her dignity, and the ability to continue doing what she loved. Leaving the office, she felt light, as if she had left behind an invisible weight she had been carrying. That afternoon, back at El Sabor de Mercedes, while working on her new recipe, Mercedes reflected on the journey she had undertaken. She had gone from fear and desperation to hope and recovery, from feeling misunderstood and dismissed to finding validation and support, from seeing her body as a treacherous enemy to recognizing it as an ally that needed care and attention. While her hands worked the dough, now with renewed strength, Mercedes thought about all the older people she knew in her town. How many of them were silently struggling against the same condition without even knowing it? How many were losing their independence, their joy of living, simply because no one had recognized the symptoms, or because, as in her case, they had been dismissed as things of age? "You should share your story, Mom," said Elena, as if she had read her thoughts. She had come to help with the experimental new bread, and now sat on a high stool watching her mother work. It could help a lot of people. The idea was intimidating. Mercedes had never been a person who sought the spotlight. Her life had been dedicated to her family and her bakery, not to public speaking. But when she thought about how alone she had felt during those dark months, how she had believed she was losing her mind because no one took her symptoms seriously, about the difference it had made to finally get a correct diagnosis, maybe it was worth stepping out of her comfort zone if it meant someone else wouldn't have to go through the same thing. "All right," she said finally, surprising even Elena with her quick acceptance. "Let's do it, but with one condition." She pointed to the dough she was working. "This bread will be ready by then, and I want everyone to be able to try it. If we're going to talk about nutrition and proteins, it better be with something that actually makes you want to eat it, not those protein bars that taste like cardboard." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Elena, with her usual academic efficiency, took charge of organizing the event. She got the community center to lend them the space for free after explaining the educational purpose. Dr. Ramirez, enthusiastic about the initiative, not only accepted to participate, but also offered to bring some colleagues interested in geriatrics and preventive medicine. The day of the presentation, the community center was fuller than anyone had anticipated. Not only did older people from the town attend, but also family members worried about their parents or grandparents, local health professionals interested in learning more, and even some young people who were simply curious about the topic. Mercedes, nervous but determined, sat in the front row while Dr. Ramirez began the event with a clear and accessible explanation of what sarcopenia is. The word sarcopenia comes from the Greek sarco, meaning flesh or muscle, and penia, meaning loss, the doctor explained. It is, literally, the loss of flesh. And while it's natural to lose some muscle mass with age, when this loss accelerates and begins to significantly affect function and quality of life, we're talking about a medical condition that requires attention. Lucia took over to talk about the crucial role of exercise in preventing and treating sarcopenia. "Our muscles work on the principle of use it or lose it," she explained, doing a practical demonstration with some resistance elastic bands. "Strength training isn't just for young people or athletes. In fact, it's even more important as we age." Marta spoke next about nutrition, emphasizing the importance of protein in the diet of older adults. "As we age, our body becomes less efficient at using the protein we consume," she explained. "This means we need to increase our intake to maintain the same muscle mass, and yet many older adults reduce their protein consumption due to chewing problems, changes in appetite, or simply ingrained dietary habits." Finally came the moment that Mercedes had both anticipated and feared, sharing her own story. With trembling legs but a firm voice, she went up to the small stage. She wore a simple but elegant dress that Elena had helped her choose, and her white hair was pulled back in a bun that highlighted her still beautiful features. She looked at the audience, recognizing many familiar faces, bakery customers, lifelong neighbors, friends who had been present at important moments of her existence. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "I've never been good with words," she admitted with a shy smile. "I've always preferred to let my bread speak for me. But today, I want to share something more important than any recipe I've created. I want to tell you about my struggle with something called sarcopenia, a word I didn't even know until 6 months ago, but which was slowly stealing everything I valued." With honesty that moved everyone present, Mercedes recounted her experience. She spoke of the fear she felt when her body began to fail her, of the frustration of not being taken seriously, of the shame of public falls, of sleepless nights wondering if she would have to give up her beloved bakery. "The worst wasn't the physical pain," she confessed, "but the feeling that I was losing control of my own life, that something was stealing my independence day by day, and no one seemed to see it or understand it." But then her narrative changed tone, brightening when she described how Elena had really listened to her, how they had found Dr. Ramirez, and how the diagnosis, though alarming, had also been liberating. "Finally, I had a name for what I was experiencing," she said. "Finally, I knew I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't simply getting old, that there was a real reason for what I felt, and most importantly, there was something I could do about it." To demonstrate her point, Mercedes did something that would have been unthinkable months earlier. She squatted and stood up several times in succession without support, maintaining perfect balance. The audience applauded spontaneously, some with tears in their eyes. "And most importantly," Mercedes concluded, "is that I learned it's never too late to take care of our muscles, our strength. That exercise and good nutrition aren't luxuries or things just for young people. They're essential investments in our independence and quality of life as we age." When Mercedes finished her presentation, there was a moment of silence followed by thunderous applause. People who had known her for decades now looked at her with new eyes, with renewed respect and admiration. But what moved her most were the older people who approached afterward, some with tears in their eyes, to thank her for giving voice to what they too had been experiencing in silence. If you learned something from Mercedes' story today, please help this message reach more people who could benefit from this information. Leave your like, share with those who might be facing this silent battle, and join this community that's growing every day. Each interaction can make a difference in the life of someone who is going through what Mercedes went through, feeling alone and without answers. And remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to our health. As the event concluded and attendees enjoyed the strength bread that Mercedes had prepared especially for the occasion, she found herself surrounded by her 3 children. Carlos, the pragmatic businessman, had a thoughtful expression that Mercedes rarely saw in him. "You know, Mom," he said, "I never realized what you were really going through. I think I owe you an apology for not listening when you tried to tell us something was wrong." Anna nodded with tears in her eyes. "Me too, Mom. I saw you struggle, but I assumed it was just, age. I never imagined there was a specific medical condition behind it, something that could be treated." Mercedes hugged her children, feeling a wave of love and gratitude for them, despite past misunderstandings. "You didn't know," she assured them. "I didn't know it myself. What matters is that now we all understand better, and maybe we can help others understand too." Eleanor, who had been talking with Dr. Ramirez, joined the family group with an expression of barely contained enthusiasm. "I have incredible news," she announced. "Doctor, Ramirez says the regional hospital is interested in establishing a specific program for sarcopenia diagnosis and treatment, and they want Mom to be part of it as a patient advisor." Mercedes blinked, surprised. "Me? What could I contribute to a medical program?" Dr. Ramirez, who had approached behind Elena, responded, "Your experience, Mrs. Mercedes, your perspective as a patient is invaluable. You can help us better understand how to communicate with other patients, how to recognize early signs that doctors might overlook, how to make treatments more accessible and realistic for older people in situations similar to yours. The idea of being able to help others, of converting her difficult experience into something positive that could benefit more people, resonated deeply with Mercedes. All her life, she had nourished her community through her bread. Maybe now she could nourish them in a different but equally important way. In the months that followed, Mercedes's life experienced changes she never could have imagined possible a year earlier. Her strength bread became the bakery's most popular product, with customers coming specifically to buy it, not only for its taste, but for its nutritional benefits. Inspired by its success, Mercedes began developing other recipes focused on the nutritional needs of older adults. Calcium-rich cookies, muffins with added protein, whole grain breads with seeds and nuts. The regional hospital's Sarcopenia program was inaugurated with great success, with Mercedes as part of the advisory committee. Her perspective as a patient and now advocate proved to be exactly what medical professionals needed to design a truly patient-centered program. At her suggestion, they incorporated not only medical treatments, but also practical aspects like transportation for patients with reduced mobility, cooking classes to teach protein-rich preparations, and support groups where patients could share their experiences and strategies. Lucia, the physiotherapist, began offering group exercise classes specifically designed to combat sarcopenia at the community center. Mercedes never missed a session, now leading by example while helping others gain confidence in their own physical capabilities. Seeing people who initially could barely get up from a chair without help progress to being able to perform exercises with light weights gave her satisfaction that rivaled seeing her perfectly baked breads. One afternoon, while Mercedes was leading an exercise session alongside Lucia, she noticed an older woman sitting at the back of the room, watching with a longing but fearful expression. After class, Mercedes approached her. "First time?" she asked kindly. The woman, who introduced herself as Dolores, nodded shyly. "My daughter insisted I come," she confessed. "She says I'm getting weaker and weaker, that I can't do the things I used to do, but I'm afraid it's too late for me. I'm 75 years old, and I've never exercised in my life." Mercedes smiled, recognizing in Dolores the same fears she had faced. "I was 68 when I started," she told her, "and I was so weak I couldn't knead my own bread, something I'd done all my life. Now look." She flexed her arm, showing a defined muscle that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. "It's never too late to begin. The human body is incredibly adaptable, even at our age." In her next follow-up appointment with Dr. Ramirez, the test results confirmed what Mercedes already felt. She had continued improving, even exceeding the medical team's most optimistic expectations. Her muscle mass was now within the normal range for her age, and her strength had increased to levels comparable to a woman 10 years younger. "It's truly extraordinary," commented the doctor, reviewing the results. "You've demonstrated what I always tell my students. With the correct diagnosis, appropriate treatment, and most importantly, the patient's attitude and determination, we can challenge many traditional assumptions about aging." Mercedes smiled, thinking about the long journey traveled. "You know, doctor, when I was diagnosed with sarcopenia, I thought it was the end of my life as I knew it. I never imagined it would be the beginning of something new, something even better in many ways." The news about the regional hospital's Sarcopenia program attracted the attention of local media, and soon Mercedes found herself giving interviews for newspapers and radio stations. With each interview, she emphasized the same message: sarcopenia is a real condition affecting millions of older adults, often without being diagnosed. But with early recognition and proper treatment, it's possible to recover strength, independence, and quality of life. Dr. Ramirez began receiving calls from colleagues at other hospitals, interested in replicating the program. Lucia had to increase the number of exercise classes due to growing demand, and Marta, the nutritionist, began offering cooking workshops at the community center. teaching older adults and their caregivers how to prepare nutritious meals that supported muscle health without sacrificing flavor or eating pleasure. El Sabor de Mercedes gradually transformed. While it continued offering the traditional breads that had made the bakery famous, now there was an entire section dedicated to products specifically designed to support muscle and bone health in older adults. Strength bread had been just the beginning. Now there were calcium and protein-enriched cookies, homemade energy bars with nuts and seeds, and cakes that incorporated ingredients like Greek yogurt and ricotta to increase their protein value. What was most surprising for Mercedes was seeing how her customer demographics changed. In addition to her usual lifelong buyers, now people came from neighboring towns specifically looking for her special products. Older adults, yes, but also local athletes, mothers concerned about their family's nutrition, and increasingly health professionals who recommended her products to their patients. One day, Mercedes was attending the bakery when an elegant woman of about 60 entered, accompanied by an older man that Mercedes immediately recognized as one of the most renowned doctors in the provincial capital. The woman introduced herself as director of an important university hospital. "We've heard a lot about you, Mrs. Mercedes," she said with a warm smile, "about your work with sarcopenia awareness, about your products specially designed for muscle health. We're starting a specialized center for healthy aging and would love to have your advisement." Mercedes almost dropped the bread tray she was holding. "My advisement? But I'm just a baker. I don't have medical training." The woman shook her head. "You have something equally valuable: lived experience, first-hand understanding of the challenges our patients face, and a demonstrated ability to communicate complex information in an accessible and motivating way." She leaned over the counter, her expression sincere. "Besides, these breads of yours could be a wonderful addition to our comprehensive treatment approach." That night, while Mercedes shared the news with her family during dinner, she realized how much her life had changed in little more than a year. From a woman who struggled silently against an invisible enemy, fearing the loss of her independence and dignity, she had transformed into an advocate, an educator, and now, potentially, an advisor for a specialized medical center. "Are you going to accept?" asked Elena, always the most enthusiastic about new opportunities. Mercedes took a sip of her tea, carefully considering the proposal. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's a big commitment, and I have the bakery." "The bakery can wait a couple of days a week," intervened Carlos, surprising everyone with his change of attitude. The same son who a year earlier had suggested maybe it was time to think about the bakery's future now encouraged her to expand her horizons. "Besides, Luis is more than capable of handling it when you're not there." Anna, always the most practical of the three siblings, was already thinking about logistics. "We could take turns driving you to the capital on the days you need to go, or maybe you could stay with me those days. My house is much closer to the university hospital." "I'll do it," Mercedes decided finally. 2 days a week to start. I want to see if I can really be useful." Mercedes began her work at the Healthy Aging Center a month later. Her role was multifaceted. She advised the medical team on effective communication with older patients, shared her experience in support groups for people newly diagnosed with sarcopenia, and collaborated with the nutrition team to develop menus that were not only nutritious, but also appetizing and culturally appropriate for the local population. At first, she felt intimidated, surrounded by doctors, scientists, and academics with years of formal education. But she soon discovered that her experiential knowledge was equally valuable. "You help us see the forest when we only see trees," the head of the geriatrics department once told her. "You remind us that behind every statistical data point, behind every muscle mass measurement, there's a real person with fears, hopes, and a life they want to continue living fully." Her most significant contribution was perhaps the creation of a patient mentors program, where people who had experienced significant improvement in their sarcopenia were paired with newly diagnosed patients. Mercedes knew from her own experience how valuable it was to have someone who had walked the same path, someone who truly understood the emotional and practical challenges of the condition. "When I was diagnosed," she often explained, "what would have helped me most wasn't just medical information, but seeing someone like me who had improved, who showed me it was possible. Hope is a powerful medicine, perhaps the most powerful of all." As her participation in the center grew, Mercedes began being invited to regional and national conferences on healthy aging. The first time they called her a sarcopenia expert, she laughed at the irony. She, who hadn't even heard the word until little more than a year ago, was now considered an authority on the subject. Not for her technical knowledge, although she had absorbed a surprising amount of medical information in her work with the hospital team, but for her unique ability to translate that information into terms anyone could understand, and more importantly, act upon. At one of these conferences, after giving a particularly moving talk about the importance of taking older adults' complaints seriously, a doctor approached her. He was an older man, about 70, with completely white hair and kind eyes behind thick-framed glasses. "Mrs. Mercedes," he said, shaking her hand firmly, "your presentation has moved me deeply. I'm afraid I've been guilty of dismissing symptoms like those you described, attributing them simply to normal aging." Mercedes nodded understandingly. "It's an easy mistake to make," she responded without blame, "especially because many patients assume it too. I did it myself at first. What impacted me most," the doctor continued, "is realizing that I myself am experiencing many of the symptoms you described. The difficulty getting up from a chair, disproportionate muscle fatigue after activities that used to be easy. I had attributed it to being 72 years old, but now I wonder if perhaps—" "It's never too late to find out," Mercedes encouraged him with a smile. "My diagnosis came at 68, and look at everything I've been able to improve since then." 2 years after her initial diagnosis, Mercedes received an unexpected call from a major medical publisher. They wanted her to write a book, not a medical text, but an accessible book for the general public about sarcopenia, what it is, how to recognize it, how to address it, all told through her own personal experience and those of other patients she had met in her work. "But I'm not a writer," Mercedes protested, overwhelmed by the proposal. "I'm a baker." "You're much more than that," the editor responded. "You're someone who has lived this experience and has helped countless people through it. You have a gift for communicating complex information clearly and motivationally, and you have a story that can change lives." 3 months later, Mercedes began working on her book with the help of a professional writer who helped her structure her thoughts and experiences. Each chapter combined solid medical information with personal narratives, not only her own, but also those of many other patients she had met in her work. It included practical exercises, nutritional advice, and what Mercedes considered perhaps most important, strategies for medical self-advocacy to ensure symptoms were taken seriously and received proper attention. 1 year later, Mercedes' book, Stronger Than You Think, My Journey Through Sarcopenia, was published. The launch was held at her bakery, transformed for the occasion into a meeting space filled with people whose lives had been touched by her work, patients who had found hope in her example, health professionals who had learned from her perspective, family members who had learned to really listen to their older loved ones. Among the attendees was Dolores, now unrecognizable compared to the frail and discouraged woman who had entered the bakery a year earlier. Although she still occasionally used a cane, she moved with renewed confidence. Following Mercedes' example, she had not only sought treatment for her sarcopenia, but had also started a support group in her own town, creating a space where other older adults could share their experiences and support each other in their recovery. While Mercedes signed copies of her book, she marveled at how life could take such unexpected turns. At 71, when many might think about retiring, she had found a new purpose, a new passion. Sarcopenia, which had once threatened to steal everything she valued, had paradoxically become the catalyst for a richer, more meaningful and more connected life than she ever could have imagined. Dr. Ramirez, who had been invited as a speaker at the launch, perfectly summarized the situation in his closing words. Mercedes's story shows us that our greatest challenges often contain our greatest opportunities, that it's never too late to recover strength, reinvent ourselves, and find new purpose. And perhaps most importantly, that when we transform our personal struggle into service to others, we find a form of strength that no medical condition can take away. As the crowd applauded, Mercedes looked around at the community she had helped create, at Elena, Carlos, and Anna, the children who had grown through this experience as much as she had, at Lucia and Marta, who had brought their professional knowledge to so many people in need thanks to their collaboration, at Dolores and so many others who had found their own path to recovery, inspired by her example. In that moment, Mercedes knew with certainty something she had suspected for some time. True strength doesn't reside only in muscles. It resides in human connection, in the courage to share our vulnerabilities, in the determination to transform our pain into purpose. Sarcopenia had tried to steal her physical strength, but in the process, it had revealed an inner strength she didn't even know she possessed, a strength she could now share with the world. As she signed another copy of her book, Mercedes remembered the words she had written in the dedication. For all those who have ever felt their body betray them, that their concerns aren't heard, that their strength is fading, this book is for you. So you know you're not alone, that there's a path forward, and that it's never, never too late to recover not only physical strength, but also the joy, dignity, and purpose you deserve at every stage of life. Words she had lived, words she had proven on her own skin, words that were now her mission to share with the world. Because in the end, we all deserve the opportunity to be stronger than we think. Currently, 3 years after her initial diagnosis, Mercedes continues running El Sabor de Mercedes, although now with the help of Luis, who has become practically a partner in the business. She continues her work at the Healthy Aging Center, has expanded her mentors program to several hospitals in the region, and her book is in its 3rd edition, with translations in 4 languages. But perhaps what makes her proudest is the impact she sees in her immediate community. The community center, where it all began with that first informational presentation, now hosts 3 weekly exercise classes specific for sarcopenia, a monthly support group, and regular workshops on nutrition for older adults. Awareness of the condition has grown exponentially, and more people are seeking early diagnosis and treatment, avoiding the long path of silent suffering she had to travel. And every morning, as Mercedes lights the bakery ovens, she's grateful for the recovered strength in her hands that allows her to continue creating the bread she loves so much. She's grateful to her body, which has responded so remarkably to the care and attention she now dedicates to it. She's grateful to medical science, which gave her the tools to combat sarcopenia. But above all, she's grateful for the opportunity to transform one of the most difficult chapters of her life into a source of hope and strength for others. Because in the end, as Mercedes has discovered, it's not just about the bread we bake or the muscles we strengthen. It's about the lives we touch, the connections we form, and the difference we make in the world. One day at a time, one person at a time. And in that sense, Mercedes is undoubtedly stronger today than she has ever been. The story we shared today is just one among many transformation journeys we witness. I recognize your courage in seeking solutions, even when the path seems difficult. If you want to recover not just your physical strength, but also the confidence and independence that sarcopenia can diminish, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel, share your story in the comments, and allow us to walk alongside you on this journey. The strength you seek already exists within you. We're here just to help you rediscover it. Until the next video, take care of yourself with the care you deserve.